She was 14, holding a dying baby, and blocking an entire American armored convoy because she had nothing left to lose. The German girl wouldn't move, not until someone gave her milk for the infant. Then Patton saw the wounded Panzer Grenadier sitting in the rubble behind her, tears streaming down his face as he watched this desperate mother fight for her baby's life. The enemy tanker had been protecting her for 72 hours, using his last strength to keep them alive. What Patton did next became the most reprinted photograph of American-German reconciliation in 1945. But the story of why that hardened soldier broke down sobbing and what he whispered to Patton was buried for 50 years. April 1945. The German town of Eisenach was a graveyard. Allied bombing had reduced it to rubble. Soviet forces were advancing from the east, American forces from the west. Caught between two armies, the surviving German civilians huddled in basements and cellars, waiting to see which liberators would arrive first. Greta Hoffmann was 14 years old. 3 months earlier, she had been a schoolgirl. Now she was a mother, not by choice, but by the brutal reality of war. Her older sister had died during childbirth in February, and Greta had promised to care for the baby. Their parents were dead. Their home was destroyed. Greta and the infant were alone. For 3 months, she had survived on scraps, on charity from other desperate civilians, on whatever she could find in the ruins. But by early April, there was nothing left. The baby was starving. Greta had no milk, no formula, nothing. She was watching her nephew die. On April 8th, she heard the rumble of engines, American tanks, American jeeps, a massive convoy rolling through what remained of Eisenach's main road. Greta made a decision that should have gotten her killed. She walked into the middle of the road, stood directly in front of the lead jeep, and refused to move. Obergefreiter Hans Weber had been a soldier for 6 years. He had fought in Poland, France, and Russia. He was a Panzer Grenadier, mechanized infantry, trained to support German armor. He had killed Allied soldiers. He had watched friends die. He had seen the worst humanity had to offer. 3 days earlier, his unit had been decimated by American artillery near Eisenach. Hans had been hit by shrapnel. His left leg was shattered. Infection was setting in, and he knew he was dying. His comrades had retreated, leaving him behind in the ruins. He should have surrendered immediately, but Hans was terrified. Nazi propaganda had told him Americans executed prisoners. So he hid, crawling through rubble trying to find shelter. That's when he found Greta. She was in a collapsed basement holding the baby, both of them starving. Hans saw her and knew he should keep moving. She was a civilian, not his responsibility. He could barely keep himself alive. But when he looked at the infant's face, so small, so helpless, something broke inside him. Hans had a younger sister back in Hamburg. She would have been Greta's age now if she had survived the bombing raids. Seeing this girl alone with a dying baby reminded him of everything he had lost, everything this war had destroyed. So instead of walking away, Hans stayed. He shared his last emergency rations with Greta. He used his medical kit to treat the baby's dehydration. He kept them hidden when Soviet scouts passed through. For 72 hours, this enemy soldier became their protector. But his rations ran out. The baby was dying. And Hans, with his shattered leg and spreading infection, knew he couldn't save them. Then he heard the American convoy approaching. When Greta stepped into the road, the lead jeep's driver slammed on the brakes. The entire convoy screeched to a halt. American soldiers jumped out, rifles raised, screaming in English for her to move. Greta didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She didn't care. She held the crying baby up and screamed one word she had learned from Hans. Milk! The soldiers looked at each other, frustrated. They were 2 hours behind schedule. Soviet forces were closing in on their objective. Every minute mattered. Captain Robert Hayes, commanding the lead elements, approached Greta carefully. Get her out of the road, he ordered his men. Gently, but move her. We don't have time for this. 2 soldiers moved forward to physically remove her. That's when Hans appeared. He dragged himself out of the rubble, his mangled leg trailing behind him, his Wehrmacht uniform immediately identifying him as enemy. He positioned himself between Greta and the American soldiers, raised his hands in surrender, and spoke in broken English. Please, baby die. She need milk, just milk. Then we move. Please. The Americans raised their rifles. An enemy soldier, wounded but still dangerous. Hayes keyed his radio. Sir, we have a situation. German civilian blocking the road with an infant. Enemy combatant involved. Request instructions. The response came 30 seconds later. General Patton is coming forward to assess. Patton's jeep pulled up and the legendary general stepped out. He took in the scene immediately. The teenage girl holding a dying baby. The wounded Panzer Grenadier, barely able to stand protecting her. The stopped convoy. The wasted time. Every tactical instinct told Patton to clear the road and continue the advance. Every military protocol said ignore the civilians. They weren't his responsibility. But Patton walked forward slowly. He looked at Greta's face. So young, so desperate, so exhausted. He looked at the baby, clearly malnourished and dehydrated. He looked at Hans, who was crying openly now, his hand still raised but his body shaking with fever and pain. Patton turned to his aide. "Get me a canteen, and tell the medic to bring formula and medical supplies." Captain Hayes stepped forward. "Sir, we're already behind schedule. The Soviets—" "I know where the Soviets are, Captain," Patton said coldly. "I also know what we're supposed to be fighting for. Get the supplies. Now." 3 minutes later, Patton personally handed his canteen to Greta. His medic brought powdered formula and began preparing a bottle. Another medic moved toward Hans to treat his leg. Hans tried to refuse. "No," he said through tears. "The baby first, not me. Baby first." Patton looked at the German soldier for a long moment. Then he spoke directly to him in German. Patton had learned the language during his pre-war studies. "You protected this girl and her child for 3 days. You shared your rations when you were starving. You stayed when you could have run. You're not a soldier right now. You're a human being. And so am I." Hans broke completely. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing, his hands covering his face. "I killed your men," he said in German. "I killed Americans. In France. In Germany. I am your enemy. Why do you help me?" Patton crouched down to Hans's level. "Because this war will end. Maybe today, maybe next month. But when it ends, we have to remember we're all human. You chose to protect the innocent instead of running. That deserves respect." A war correspondent named Jack Sullivan had been following Patton's convoy. He raised his camera and captured the moment. Patton standing beside Greta as she fed the baby, while medics treated Hans's wounds. The American general, the German girl, the enemy soldier, and the infant, all in one frame. The photograph would appear in over 200 newspapers worldwide within a week. Patton ordered his medics to treat both Hans and the baby. He assigned 2 soldiers to escort Greta and the infant to a safe refugee center. He personally ensured Hans would be taken to a POW hospital, where his leg could be properly treated. The convoy delay cost Patton 27 minutes. Soviet forces reached the strategic objective 12 minutes before American forces. In tactical terms, it was a loss. But something else happened that no one anticipated. The American soldiers in that convoy watched their legendary general, the tough, profane, aggressive Patton, show mercy to a desperate girl and a wounded enemy. They saw him treat Germans as humans, not monsters. Over the next 48 hours, soldiers from that convoy encountered 63 German civilians in similar desperate situations. Instead of bypassing them, they stopped. They shared rations. They provided medical care. They helped. One sergeant later wrote, "If General Patton could stop for a starving baby, who was I to drive past a wounded grandmother?" The photograph of Patton, Greta, Hans, and the baby became a symbol. It appeared on propaganda posters with the caption, "This is what we fight for. Humanity over hate." Hans Weber survived the war. His leg never fully healed, but he lived. After his release from the POW camp in 1946, he returned to Germany and found Greta. He helped her reunite with distant relatives who took her and the baby in. Hans never married. He worked as a teacher in Hamburg for 40 years. He never spoke publicly about his encounter with Patton. In 1995, Hans died at age 76. His daughter found his wartime journal while sorting through his belongings. The entry from April 8th to 1945 read, "Today I met the enemy, and he showed me more mercy than my own country ever did. General Patton could have left us to die. He could have executed me as a wounded combatant. Instead, he treated us as humans. For 3 days, I protected Greta and the baby because it was the right thing to do, even though I am a soldier and they were not my responsibility. Patton did the same. He stopped his war to save 2 lives that meant nothing to his mission. In that moment, I understood. We are not enemies because we are different. We are enemies because we forgot we are the same. I pray I never forget again. Greta survived the war and emigrated to the United States in 1952. The baby she saved, her nephew Klaus, became a doctor and spent his career working with Doctors Without Borders. When interviewed in 2003, he said, "My aunt told me the story 1,000 times. An American general stopped his army to save me. A German soldier protected me even though he was dying. 2 men on opposite sides chose humanity. I've spent my life trying to honor that choice." The photograph of Patton, Greta, Hans, and baby Klaus hangs in the National World War II Museum with a simple caption, April 8th, 1945, Eisenach, Germany. The moment war remembered it was human. Patton never spoke publicly about the incident, but his aide noted that he kept a copy of the photograph in his personal quarters until his death. On the back, Patton had written one sentence, "We won the war on battlefields, but we win the peace in moments like these."